What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I am back with yet another album review. Sadly, John is having some car trouble, so he couldn't make it over tonight, which sucks because I know he really wanted to go over this one. Because today, we're going over the latest offering from SpiritWorld, Helldorado. This comes out on the 21st of March on Century Media Records. This band formed sometime before 2017, which was the time their first demo came out. There really wasn't an exact date on the archives, but they did form in Las Vegas, Nevada. I do know that much. This is their third full length overall. I got into them with their debut album, Pagan Rhythms, which was an absolute banger. And their follow-up, Death Western, was a year-ender for me. I absolutely love that album. We actually got to see them live not too long before that album dropped, and holy shit, these guys are just unbelievably entertaining live. Now, I knew this band had like a Western theme before we saw them live, but believe me, we were kind of shocked when the band came on with like rhinestone jackets and cowboy hats and absolutely just tore the place apart. It was absolutely amazing. And this band is back with their brand of rhinestones and riffs. This is like thrash metal, metallic hardcore, a touch of death metal, and well, some new and maybe arguably old wrinkles kind of thrown back in the mix from their earlier days, because this band did not start off as like a metal band. In fact, they were kind of more country western folk, but with like a darker tinge. Like all of their themes are still centered around like, you know, the western aesthetic, like, you know, just gritty western movies, except with like a Evil Dead sort of like polish to them. That was definitely once again executed really well in the art department, which I got to give a shout out to James Buscema, who did the artwork for this one and Death Western, both of which I think are like two of his finest pieces. And I have to say my expectations for this album were pretty damn high considering how much I jammed the shit out of Death Western. And I will also say that this album is a little bit different. The country western theme has always been a part of this band's aesthetic, and on this one, I feel like it has become more integrated into their sound overall. The opening track, Abilene Grime, while I was expecting to be just absolutely throttled after, you know, like a little bit of setup, because even Death Western had like this really cool country western acoustic piece with some fun like old western samples in it. But then the foot hit the gas pedal and it was off to the races with just chuggy riffs and D beats and bellowed vocals, gang vocals, halftime breakdowns. I mean, that whole album is just riffier than hell. But this one takes its time kind of building to that within the first song, because it's not an intro track, it's an actual song. You have some church organs that sound appropriately creepy and then a harrowing scream, and right when I was expecting like the big riffs to come in, we get into like kind of a country western gallop with cleaner guitars. You get that more fast-paced kind of snare roll, sort of like D-beat, like you hear in like faster country songs. And it kind of stays in this realm, setting it up a little bit longer than I kind of thought it would. Like towards the back half of the song, it gets riffy, it gets heavy, it notably gets darker and more sinister. But I have to say that country leading kind of threw me off a little bit, just because it kind of took a little bit to really kind of get going towards the metal part. But I also had to remind myself that this band, again, did not start off as a metal band. And while I would say like Death Western spurred me out of the chute very quickly, this one, well, the bull didn't really leave the pen very quickly. It kind of just trotted out and let the cowboy wave at the crowd, say hi to his family, then I'll brain him. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still packed full of just riffy bangers. No Vacancy in Heaven, Western Stars, The Apocalypse, Waiting on the Reaper, Oblivion, chuggy, massive songs, loaded with just killer syncopated riffs, thrashy gallops, D-beats. There's some good, solid, old-school hardcore breakdowns, like those single-kick ones that you'd hear back before they started like super syncopating everything in like the mid-2000s. Like a lot of like classic like Hatebreed and like Earth Crisis style breakdowns. The guitars are chunky, the drums have a great pop to them. This is the same production team that tackled Death Western, and there really isn't much of a drop-off. I do think that there are some differences. One difference is I do think the guitars are just slightly less present. Either that or the vocals are more out front this time. They still have a great crunch to them. Like it's more like this classic thrash and again, like early metallic hardcore sort of bite. But when this band is heavy, they know how to hit the mark. They're excellent about those halftime grooves too. Like they lead them in really well. You get that dinner bell ride. They're instant headbangers, or, you know, if you're more into moshing, get in there and fucking mosh. Like, it's pretty much a dinner bell to the mosh pit. Oblivion in particular is probably one of my favorite tracks in here. It actually features some pretty interesting guests on here. You have, and forgive me, I've never actually said this guy's name out loud. He's the main dude from Black Braid. Sagagasawa? Maybe I got that right, maybe I didn't. But he comes in and supplies some really cool guest vocals, kind of gives it like a blackened snarl to this really nasty section of the song, which is kind of hard to pick up because honestly I think that whole song is like just vicious as hell. Like the riffs on that song are particularly biting. You also have a guest appearance from Zach Blair, formerly of Gwar. He was at one time Flatus Maximus, and currently, he's in Rise Against, which is a hell of a career turn from Gwar. But he supplies some like shreddy leads and some dive bombs in there. The whole song is just vicious as hell. Same thing with Stigmata Scars, which is probably the lone song in here that really showcases a bit of their death metal side. At least on the previous two albums, the death metal, it wasn't like the biggest part. Like a lot of this you could say is just metallic hardcore and thrash kind of mixed together. Like you get a lot of Slayer riffs. It was kind of like a more groove oriented All That War. All That War, I mean, you could pretty much call them Slayer core and be 100% right. But that kind of riff, except a little bit more groove laden. Like these guys just want to get people absolutely moving. And they're excellent at it. But death metal was always like a little bit more of like a slight seasoning. Like you'd hear some like heavier, like more death metal style tremolos pop up more as an accent at the end of these chuggy riffs, or some of the breakdowns that have like just a little bit more of a death metal character to them. It's never been like a huge part of it, but it was there. And honestly, after jamming this a couple of times, the only part on here that I really found a lot of like death metal moments or like little bits of like seasoning was on Stigmata Scars. But I have a feeling that the mission statement on this album was to do something different, not repeat previous successes. They didn't want to do Death Western Part 2. They wanted to do something that, I don't know, like kind of push their sound forward. And well, it kind of does, and it kind of doesn't. There's some mixed results on here. As I said, the country western thing's always been a part of their aesthetic and, you know, themes and the lyrics. The music, however, generally it was just like this little added bit that kind of like came in before the songs. Like they would lead them in with like a country western part, again, like the intro track on Death Western. The Heretic Butcher on that album too leads in the song with this really cool acoustic passage. This, I feel like they were more committed to integrating that style into the music more, because it wasn't just Abilene Grime. You have some songs in here that are decidedly off the metal reservation. The back-to-back songs of Birdsong of Death and Prayer Lips were definitely a lot to absorb. Birdsong of Death is kind of country-esque, but it's got this kind of punk sort of vibe to it too. Like it's like a combination of like, I don't know, like Dropkick Murphys, Social Distortion, Dire Straits, and Elvis Costello, but with like a little bit of country to it. It's a very odd song. Like it stays mostly with like very clean guitars, which there's a lot more in the way of clean guitars to hear this time. But it is definitely not a metal song, even though the vocals on here, they still go with that more hardcore shout overall, which doesn't necessarily carry the melody very well. Then you have Prayer Lips, which, I mean, you could just call it a ballad because it kind of is. It's driven by acoustic guitars, a very slow rhythm, these very gruff kind of like breathy cleans. The vocals on here are definitely more dynamic. They're definitely different than the last one, but it's a very strange song, and coming at the middle of the album, like, you know, it still was feeling like it needed to build up some steam, like kind of, you know, lock on the heavier stuff. And then you're greeted to a country western ballad with a saxophone solo in it, which, yeah, I know saxophones have been popping up a lot in metal here lately. Sometimes it's pretty cool. Other times it's just sort of a what the fuck moment. This is kind of a what the fuck moment. It's a really short song too. Like it feels just like kind of like a segue into the next track, which, Waiting on the Reaper, absolutely just a vicious banger of a song that feels like it has no ties to the song before it. You also get this same sort of like country western punk vibe on the last track, Annihilism, which, at least on the album, it is spelled out in all caps locks, and generally, you know, that screams like it's authoritative, it's, you know, yelling, it's, you know, gonna be a heavy, nasty closer. That's kind of what I expected, and it really wasn't. I do think the vocals match up a little bit better on here. The melodies are pretty cool. Like, again, it's got that kind of country twang to it, and, you know, kind of like a mosey or a sachet of a rhythm to it. There's even some fiddles in it, which do fit the song, but it really didn't close the album kind of the way I wanted it to. Like, you know, I wanted, like, you know, like the last song in the set kind of closer. Like, yeah, this is their last chance to really just fuck each other up. Let's go. But this was like them saying that, and then we're square dancing. And this also brings me back to the vocals. As I said, they're a little bit more dynamic this time. I do feel like some of the intensity and like aggressiveness is kind of lost in the, you know, more hardcore vocals. They are a little bit more bellowed this time. They feel less gruff. And I do feel like he's trying to like growl in key more to kind of carry more of a melody, but it doesn't always work. In fact, like the main vocal approach in here kind of feels like what the, you know, gang vocals were on the last album. Excellent when it comes down to backing up like some just flat out vicious roars, but on their own, you know, they didn't kind of like deliver that same sort of like hardcore punch. To the band's credit though, the vocals have been different on every album, and that's kind of a cool thing that has evolved. You know, the first album I thought they were like really muffled and you could barely make out what he was saying. Death Western came through clear as a bell, twice as aggressive, like it gave the songs even more punch. Here, again, I think they're still good, but they're doing a lot more. But it doesn't always work. And some of it feels like a little unfinished, like the song Cleansing, which is a instrumental track in here. I guess maybe it was intended to be like a segue into Stigmata Scars, which I think is an absolute banger of a song. This song feels incomplete, like there's a atmospheric build up, you get acoustic guitars, and then it builds in these heavier chugs, and it really feels like it's welling up into something, and then it kind of just cuts off, and there really isn't like a just clear shift right over the next song. Like it kind of breaks, you have your pause as the song peters out, and then you get down to Stigmata Scars, which just whoops your ass. Which Stigmata Scars actually features Frederick Leclerc of Creator and Loud Blast, throws in an awesome little shreddy solo, little on the short side, but it was nice to hear like some like really vibrant thrash in there, because even the D-beat sections feel dialed down a bit. Now, I still enjoyed this album. It's still an interesting ride, but this is definitely what I would say like is a transitional album, maybe, I guess. Like, I don't know what's, you know, gonna happen in terms of like going forward with this band, but I feel like they're really trying to incorporate every aspect of their sound, and including like some of their earlier stuff in here, which is cool. It does make this band's sound stand out, but I feel like this is kind of like straying into like Volbeat territory, where their thing is like that swing and rockabilly thing that's really infused in their sound. This kind of has like more of a country thing infused in their sound, but Volbeat started off that way. That's always been their thing. This band started off a little bit different than this. It still has those heavy hardcore and thrash elements on here. Like, again, the heavy songs on here are vicious. But listening to this compared to the other two albums, which I jammed the other two albums earlier today too to kind of prep myself for this, there is kind of a stark difference here. But again, I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think this band just, again, didn't want to repeat previous successes. They didn't want to do, you know, Death Western Part 2. They wanted to write something that stood on its own, and I would say this album definitely does. Overall, though, I'm going to give it 3 stars. I still like it. I still think it's a good album. It just doesn't pack that same punch that I was looking for. And while I appreciate the fact that they're trying to grow their sound and like really incorporate some really different elements to kind of just really make themselves like stand out in metal, which is tough these days, it doesn't always land. Where it does land, I do think it's really good. Annihilism, out of the more like country-esque songs, I think is pretty good. And Abilene Grime, I think, does a good job of kind of like bridging the sound, like leading in with the country sound and then bringing in the more metal elements a little bit later. But on the other songs where I think it didn't work as well, it just feels a little par-baked, and it just feels like something that, you know, they'll continually kind of like work on in terms of like, you know, integrating that country western thing into their sound a little bit more. The riffy bangers, the stuff that I love from this band, I still think is really strong on here. Again, Oblivion, Stigmata Scars, those are probably 2 of my favorites. Waiting on the Reaper, I think is a fantastic cut too. There's still a lot of that just punchy, aggro, metallic hardcore, thrash energy on here. If you're still a big fan of their previous two, you're going to find stuff you like on here. Also, if you're a fan of bands like, again, like Power Trip, Enforced, again, like Earth Crisis, Hatebreed, I'd even throw in a band like Judiciary as well. Just check this one out. It's a little bit different, but it's still pretty fun. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and our Lone Perk is doing a members-only live stream, which we'll probably doing one mid-April, late April, who knows? And who knows what we'll talk about? We really never know. We just kind of go live and see what's going on. But we also might do like a themed one, who knows? Either way, memberships are the main way to support the channel now. We still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with their t-shirts and hats that is linked down below. And of course, if you'd like to become a member of this channel, just mosey or sashay on over to the join button and saddle up, partner. I'm sorry, I'm really kind of reaching with this country western shit. And of course, thank you guys so much for liking, subscribing, following. It means the world to us. It's just amazing seeing this channel grow. Tons of content coming in the future. Working on a whole bunch of, fun ideas and maybe a fun little collab in the future. Who knows? Either way, I'm going to thank you one more time because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.